Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Loving Our Life's Work podcast. This podcast shares examples of courage, perseverance, and triumph. Our guests are examples of people who are actively living their life's purpose, and they've come to share the vision of their life's work with us so that we can learn to give ourselves permission to live ours. If you feel like you've gained some inspiration from this podcast today, or we've added value to your world, please subscribe to follow us for more content. Comment, of course, hit the thumbs up on this podcast, and share it, of course, with someone you know who would also benefit from hearing this amazing story. I'm Adam Devaney, a clinical social worker and founder and CEO of the Life's Work Positivity brand. Today we have with us Dr. Kimberly Gordon. Dr. Gordon is a nationally renowned psychiatrist, health equity advocate, and social justice champion. She has dedicated her career and her life to empowering Black, Indigenous, people of color, including women and children, to overcome trauma, grief, and burnout. Like many who share an intense passion for their work, it's deeply rooted in her own experiences and her unwavering commitment to creating a world where no woman or child is held back by their circumstances, race, gender, or other forms of oppression. I'd like to start out by thanking Dr. Gordon for taking the time to come share with us today. Well, let's jump right in.
Wow, I love your introduction. And I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. It's been such a delight to learn from you and be inspired. And I have full intentions to tell my story today, and I hope that people are listening and ready to dig into some rich content.
Well, and that's why you're here, right? You're here because people need to hear your story. People need to hear the story that inspired your work. They need to hear about how you found that passion, that purpose, that drive to help others in the unique ways that you do. So if you could share with our audience a little bit about what your professional background is first, so we can kind of lay the foundation of that.
Well, I think the introduction was amazing, but I'll share that the journey to become a child psychiatrist and also a community psychiatrist was one that was fraught with difficulties. So my career in child psychiatry spanned from like the Hurricane Katrina era. I'm a Katrina survivor from New Orleans. I did my training at Tulane University in New Orleans for both medical school residency and for child psychiatry fellowship. And then I stayed on for a while and became a faculty member, assistant professor of psychiatry at Tulane. Throughout that journey, there were opportunities for me to really see what it's like to be someone who advocates for marginalized communities, particularly Black, Indigenous, and women of color, particularly children. In those communities, I've learned a lot about their resilience and also about their struggle. What people don't know about me is that I also had similar struggles to the patient population that I elected to serve. And oftentimes, those struggles are not actually discussed in medicine. And so, people, they go through their training program and no one has ever asked them, who are you? Why did you come to be in this position? Of course, we fill out our personal statement and all of that. But over that course of my development as a practitioner and then as a psychiatrist, I also had to dig deep in terms into the trauma work and what the traumas of my life, intergenerational and also racialized traumas, felt like as a Black professional in academic environments. Most of my career has been a clinical educator in academic environments and a consultant in academic and also organizational medicine. And so I've had numerous roles and facilitated numerous conversations for the African American community, women and children. But I'm delighted to say that in my mid-career, because we all have to grow up, in my mid-career, I'm very, very passionate about helping with this unique issue that's facing America's workforce, and that is the plight of Black women.
So how would you describe then that purpose? How if you were to encapsulate what that means to you, what's the road you're on, and what's your destination there?
Yeah, I mean, the road I'm on is still determined, but I do think that life teaches you some things, and my journey has certainly been very interesting. Some things has happened that I didn't anticipate, and some things happened that I did anticipate. I'm one of those people who plan, and so I had to figure out what success means to me. But along the way, I experienced a lot of assimilation traumas. I grew up in a rural area in Louisiana. A lot of people know me from New Orleans, but I was born in New Orleans and raised partly in Northeast Louisiana. And those two experiences was very different for me. And there was some trauma involved with those experiences as well, childhood trauma, but also just things that was happening in the ecosystem that I was in. But as I got older and I got into medicine, I didn't realize how much those experiences shaped how I saw healthcare and what solutions I had that people just wasn't ready to hear. And so I think that's happening to a lot of women, but especially women of color. They're exiting the workplace in mass numbers. And COVID actually, unfortunately, COVID made it worse. Women are already weighed down with responsibilities in their life. Some responsibilities related to childcare, responsibilities related to taking care of elderly parents, and also the societal expectations that are placed on women that are not placed on men. And we also think about the economic wage gap that we see in our society. All those things I faced, but I never thought I was going to face being misunderstood as a psychiatrist, being in a position where you really want to do real good, but you actually have to figure out what culture is best for you to do that work. So a lot of women are burning out, leaving the workplace, feeling the microaggressions or forms of racism inside of academic centers, inside of healthcare systems, inside of organizations, even corporate America. And there isn't a therapist to help them with that. There isn't a psychiatrist who's equipped to really think about all of this. And the reason why they're not equipped is because it's not taught. It's not like you go to medical school and you learn these things. Many of us may, like for instance, I believe psychologists and social workers do a better job of teaching practitioners how to do that work. But if you, in my field, there's very little spaces for that. So it's been very difficult to understand the unique needs that the health profession needs to really support women of color, and then also deal with the backlash and the regression and the some of the red tape that's actually a part of some of the work we do.
So, Dr. Heal Thyself, right?
Heal thyself, yes.
Now, thank you for sharing that with our audience, because I think that you're right. These are things that people don't know about, right? And I feel like it's because they haven't experienced that in the ways that you experience that, right? Because our experiences drive our passions, drive our purpose, drive the causes we pick up, the ball we pick up and run with, right? That's what does it, right? And you were inspired early on by your mother, right?
Absolutely, yes, Joe.
And she held that vision for you being a doctor, right?
Yes, she did. My mom was a phenomenal individual. She was actually a practicing nurse. She was a registered nurse, and she actually was a school nurse. So I saw her in school environments, and I really believe that inspired me to be a child psychiatrist. But more than that, she was just this great mom, an asset to our family in a way that, oftentimes I think go underappreciated in how much she sacrificed, both as a mother who was married at some point but divorced and single. She educated all of my siblings in private schools, which was not easy. She had to work for that, and oftentimes I feel like she robbed Peter to pay Paul for us to finish our education, as they say. But my mom had an experience when I was 9 years old that really changed, I think, her fundamentally, and also changed me. And it's oftentimes difficult to tap into that moment, but I'll share a little story if you don't mind.
I would love for you to share that with our audience.
Yeah, thank you. So I think this was around 9 years old. Honestly, my memory is not great because it's a traumatic memory, but I remember standing in a cul-de-sac, and my aunt, not my mother, but my aunt was driving around that cul-de-sac, and she drove around this cul-de-sac, I would say, for hours. I believe she was probably having a manic episode. Who knows at that time what was going on with her? But I remember when we finally was able to get her to get out of the car, she came out and she said, I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. I mean, that was her description of why that day she decided to drive around that cul-de-sac in circles for hours. And we all were, literally, she was driving around the circle for hours. Now, my mom was a very different type of person in my family, where she kind of was the storyteller. She loved to tell stories. She would explain the intergenerational traumas that happened in our family, how we came to be, and all of that. I remember very clearly when she told me that I would be a doctor. It was actually saving my little brother that he choked something. I was responsible for watching him. I felt a little guilty because this 9-year-old was watching him just briefly. She didn't abandon us. She was in the house. But he started choking, and I didn't know what to do, but I did know what to do. And so I was able to save him. And at that moment, my mom began to say, you're going to be a doctor, and you're going to be Dr. Kim. Now, my mom knew my birth story, and she understood that story well. I was actually meant to be a twin. And during her pregnancy with me, she had a lot of complications and a lot of racism in medicine. So she went to the doctor. She asked for support. She didn't get the right support. Eventually, they sent her to a specialist at Tulane who saved my life and ultimately saved my mom's life. And so she began to tell me very early, you're going to be a doctor, but not only are you going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor at Tulane, right? So that 9-year-old girl heard that message, but it was juxtaposed with another thing that was happening, a tragedy in my family. At that time, there was a lot of discourse and communications around racism as it related to crime, wars on crime, drug, all of that. But in that small town that I grew up in, I never thought that an uncle who became like a father with me would face and interact with such tragedy. Unfortunately, my uncle was brutally beat up by police. I was a young kid, so I don't know all the details, but I know that he was a good person and that whatever happened, he didn't deserve to, be beat up, and he eventually died. He was in his 30s and had small children. I went from having a family that I felt was like really cohesive. We sung together, we played together, we enjoyed each other, to a family that was torn apart. My grandmother and my grandfather ultimately made the decision to not pursue legal action just because it was a very scary time. It was around the New York events. What is it? The Central Five? I can't remember the name, but there was something happening in society that made it really difficult for them to pursue it. But there was discord because of it. My mom was depressed. Other people were depressed. There was a lot of trauma, but my uncles were just enraged. And so the family was divided about that decision. And this young little girl was in the middle of this, trying to figure out, why did my mom become depressed? What had changed? And she also was pregnant. So it was it was a lot. So I remember becoming a fixer overnight. Like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make my family happy. I'm going to fix all the problems in the world. I'm going to be a good daughter and a good doctor one day. So that was the beginning of, I guess, my social justice my social justice drive. I didn't know what it was, social justice at the time. I certainly hadn't heard the term racism in my family. We talked about racism differently. Like, Black folks would talk about, oh, be careful about which environment you go in at a certain time of day. Oh, there are certain things that, you had to know as a kid in terms of how you behave when you go out in public. But no one had told me about police brutality or racism. I only heard about that language when I was an adult. And I was actually probably in my 20s, almost 30s, before I understood that had happened to my family.
So armed with that new information, you had a new way to process that. You had a new way to look at that. Tell the audience, if you would, please, what that changed for you, in you.
That's a hard one. I think it changed a lot. I think it took away my joy, for one. I think sometimes we can get so busy doing and being that we don't necessarily process or celebrate our wins. So because I was so preoccupied with supporting my family, having economic equality, and achieving success, or what I described as success as a young girl, I think there were times where I should have celebrated my small wins and big wins, but I was on to the next stage. I'm planning. Okay, so now that you got that award, let's move on to the next. And it was, I think in my early development, it was easier because I kept getting rewards. Like I would win, I would succeed, so it was almost self-fulfilling, but it felt good. But at some point, life gets harder, things change. And when I started failing, it meant something to me. I gave myself meaning to what was a hardship. I made it something more than that. And at some point, I had to get therapy to recognize that I was in some ways self-sabotaging because I got closer to success, but it didn't feel good because it didn't give me the result that I was looking for, which was equality, justice, equity. Those things are, I guess, and freedom, right? Those things are concepts that are a little bit more existential than a young girl or anybody can fix. But I certainly was on a mission to fix it. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that with us. There's two things that you said that you were so busy focusing on success that you didn't take the time to celebrate the little successes along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that sometimes we get in our path, it's so focused on that goal that we don't realize that there are very few big wins in the world. In our lives, there's very few big wins, right? In fact, graduating or passing your licensing exam, things like that. These are the few big wins that we get.
Yeah.
But really, along the way, it's a whole bunch of wins.
Yeah.
And trauma in our life can get us so narrowly focused on the end results that we actually don't stop and celebrate the little wins along the way.
Yeah.
And there were, in your educational experience, I'm sure there were a lot of them, right? I mean, you had to get passing grades, you had to get good grades, you had to impress people, you had to do all these things along the way. And so one thing I'll say to our audience is, right, celebrate all the little wins along the way. Because from a balanced emotional standpoint, that is super important. And we can lose our we can have that hyper focus, but at the same time we can lose our focus if we don't celebrate the little wins along the way. Because all of the big wins, the couple of big wins we're going to have in our life, are all going to be made up of hundreds of small wins. And when you give yourself the opportunity to celebrate those, right, you realize that life's like, I heard Ed Milet talk about the piñata effect, right? Like you're gonna every kid at the birthday party is gonna go out there and take a whack at that piñata, and it's not gonna break open, right? But guess what? Every time that bat hits that piñata, it is absolutely making it one step closer to the time when the kid hits it and all that candy bursts out.
Yeah.
Those are the big wins, right? So we definitely want to celebrate those along the way and give ourselves credit. That's really what we're doing here, right? And I got to tell you, the world, right, will not give you credit. It is not designed to do that, right? So we have to stop and we have to make ourselves aware of the fact that we do deserve some credit along the way. It's our responsibility. Okay. And we may get it. We may get support from supportive people in our lives, and we may get a nice job from, I'm so proud of you, and those go right to the tank. We love those. We have those people in our lives. But ultimately, at the throughout the entire day, every day, it's me, it's you. That's it. It's us. We have to stop and give ourselves credit. Look at how far you have come in overcoming all those things that you were talking about.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you asked me a lot about pivotal points in life. I think that was the turning point for me. But because I wasn't celebrating all of my wins, I was depleted. I mean, you're kind of looking for like that validation to come. You're working hard those hours and you're just waiting for someone to pat you on the back and give you a hug and say, you did a good job. And it just didn't come like I had anticipated. In addition to that, I felt like a sense of like hopelessness and despair about it. And it felt like a rejecting thing. Like it was a rejection, really, Uh, and but I didn't have the self-awareness that I was somehow punishing myself. Like I was somehow punishing myself to believe that I kind of base my worthiness on what other people would say about me or how they would validate Kim, not Dr. Kim. Just I needed someone to see Kim. That was what it was about. Now, Dr. Kim or the white coat or all the accolades was my way to somehow validate my experience or validate myself. But really what I was looking for was to feel complete and worthy. And so I had to really dig deep. And for me, it was my spiritual leanings, my belief in God and being a Christian to really think about the creation story of my life, the purpose of my life, that I did have divine purpose, that I did have gifts and talents that were bestowed upon me, but I didn't need those talents or gifts or accolades or success to be worthy, that I was already ready, that I was created as a complete vessel. And it really redefined and really shaped my experience different. So I started seeing myself not as a person that was meant to suffer, to bear disappointments and just keep going and keep striving and never rest and be on the grind. I started seeing myself as a person that was complete, that required rest, that required restoration and faith to build on what my purpose was. We all have these gifts that we ignore or we don't cultivate or we put aside or we use to manipulate to make ourselves feel validated or feel important. And I don't believe I was ever doing it in a narcissistic, selfish way. I think I had as a young person, I had this really goal. I wanted to make people happy again. I wanted to have people feel whole. But I don't think it's possible for any of us as human beings to feel whole until we understand that our self-acceptance and having compassion for ourselves is just fundamental. So as I started to posture differently, where I took that time for myself, I went from being this resentful person. I mean, of course, I wasn't showing my resentfulness because I'm pretty nice. But inside, I resented all the time I spent. In time, I was always like tired and exhausted and frustrated with folks because they wouldn't fix themselves. Like, why can't you do it? I'm doing the work. Why can't you fix it? Fix it, Jesus. I remember saying that one day and literally fix it, Jesus. And he said to me, it's already done. Like, what are you doing? It's not your job to do it. And I sat with that for a moment and I began to rest. And I do believe that some of the exodus in the workplace, particularly for women, Indigenous women of color and Black women, is that we're looking for validation from others, right? Many Black women, for instance, are the breadwinners of their families. Black women in this country actually have a higher education than Black men for the most part. A lot of it has to do with racism and discrimination and how our educational system is set up. But if you can think about this educational and economic gap and the role that society places on Black women, that's very different than the roles that they oftentimes are positioned to be in, it can just be exhausting, right? And you come to find that your worth is in doing versus your worth is in being. It's something about being settled in yourself. I call it being your authentic self, right?
Yeah.
That really helps you understand your purpose and what is divine about that purpose and what is divine about you as a complete vessel, right? And I'm using that language, I couldn't, as a psychiatrist, I couldn't necessarily talk about my faith as much as I wanted to, but it certainly has given me purpose and meaning. And as a mindset coach, I really want other people to understand that you can't compartmentalize parts of yourself, your spiritual self, your mental, your emotional, your physical. They're all a unit. And if one unit is suffering, all of the units will eventually suffer. But it doesn't mean that that unit that was actually really strong left you. It's just that you're depleted in one area and it's kind of requiring you to take some attention to that. So understanding like what your core values are is so important.
So really what I hear from you is that you see a lot of people out there who are like you, right? Both professionally, right? As a Black or Indigenous person of color, you see them still suffering from the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel that because you're obviously an empathic person, or you wouldn't be in the helping profession that you are, right? And it can be difficult for us because we look. I'm a therapist, right? We look at our clients, right, and we think, how has it been 9 years that I've been seeing you, right? Like how is it that like you like I don't see any growth here because I don't see that you've actually done anything but identify with the trauma, right? And when we are looking for emotional balance, when we really want to go to the next levels, we have to hit new levels of inner emotional balance. That's us. That's our responsibility. It's within us, right? And faith can be such a great tool in that work. And I've seen it really transform people. And that's fantastic. I'd love to hear when people say that was a really important part of their path of healing. Mm-hmm. And then when we see people who are looking for validation outside of themselves, we know once we have healed from that, we know that is painful. We know that that's a difficult path to walk. That's not really going to have that authentic self-validation, right? And then on top of that, you're talking about looking at it from the standpoint of my creator has created me whole and complete and worthy. Mm-hmm. And we look at how worthiness, right, is like one of the core wounds of humanity. And it goes across every group that I could possibly categorize anybody in. I find a lack of worthiness. I find the trauma in people's subconscious in my work of a lack of worthiness, right? And part of that does come from the faith community. Okay, I've walked out of sermons. I walk out of the sermon that we were created lower than dust. Okay, like I walk out of that sermon. Sorry, buddy, we're not doing that today. Okay, you tell me about how much Jesus loves me, and I will perk up and listen. Right, but you're not going to tell me that I'm lower than dust and that I was created that way. Sorry, we're not doing that today. Okay, I really truly believe in the two greatest commandments, right? Love God, love people, right? That's it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so when we see the other people suffering and we've done that work ourselves, we want to shout from the mountaintop, you're going to need to do the work, right? Because the road you're walking down is going to be painful, right? And it just warms my heart to hear people like you talk about how faith was important for you, how you got out of that looking for validation outside of yourself constantly, because that's a trauma response, right? So I want you to talk to our audience about your perspective on healing from trauma, because that is what you are talking to people about now in your coaching program. So I really want you to share that perspective with our audience so that they can learn to do that important inner work themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that one, I think you could be at different stages of your healing journey. Either, TD Jakes talked about having different phases and growth, like in resilience and grit. So I went from like phase 1 in life to phase 10, but even at phase 10, you start back at 1, right? So I want to encourage people that no matter where you are in your healing journey, whether you're at phase 1 or phase 10 or step 1 or step 2 or 3 or 4, 9, whatever, you are entitled to feel. You can't process trauma unless you are able to validate your own feelings, right? I think sometimes, especially in the trauma work, I think the core issue for me and what I've seen, particularly in women, but in children as well, is I want to be seen. I want to be validated. Did you see what I went through? Can't you tell that I'm going through something? Did you see me? That is the core thing. See me, right? But I'm encouraging people today, and I had to encourage myself. This is not something that I just share with people, but I had to encourage myself to actually allow myself to grieve. You know, I didn't share earlier that my mom passed away from breast cancer, but that was a pivotal moment for me because I had spent most of my medical school time and I was in residency when she passed away. My validation was I'm going to be a good doctor and I'm going to take care of my mom and I'm going to make her happy, right? That was the purpose, the sole purpose. And then, you know, God had his plans. My mom died of breast cancer. I was angry. I was angry, but I couldn't deal with those emotions. I was angry, right? I was disappointed. I felt I had failed at something I fundamentally believed was my purpose in life. My purpose in life was to do this one thing, and I couldn't do it because she was taken away. And so I had to really sit with my emotions, and that was painful. I went to therapy. I did a lot of things, y'all. I went to therapy. I went to church. I prayed. You know, I did a fast. Eventually, I found a somatic healer who helped me learn grounding techniques and really sit with my emotions and where it was in my body, the trauma of it. I did hypnosis to really uncover the stories, the narratives that I had been telling myself. While it was profound to hear this little girl tell her experience of a story and know that this adult kind of understand how that story played out a little bit better. But I was letting the young girl be the author of the story, right? And so I would encourage people really to just sit a little bit, give yourself some time, give yourself some grace to feel. I remember someone who was a grief counselor telling me that the hardest part about grief when you lose someone is allowing yourself to feel the pain of that loss, right? That's the hardest part. So that's why we go through all of those stages of grief, because we're trying to avoid really the feeling of the loss, right? It almost feels like an abandonment, to be quite honest. That's what it felt like for me. But I think when I allow myself to sit with that loss and tell myself, that little girl, you're okay. You're going to be okay with the loss, that you actually can take care of yourself. I saw myself waving all of like the family members who had passed away, all the, you know, jobs, careers, and was like, I got my bag. I got everything I needed. All I really needed was myself. And for me, my creator, God, right? But I don't think I could actually have gotten to that place until I was able to sit with my own emotions, because I couldn't share my emotions with God because I was ashamed of them. Like I wanted to avoid them.
Wow, that's quite an admission.
Right. So that moment when I was like, you know what, God, I am so upset that you took my mom the way you did. You know, I had plans, right? You ruined those plans. It was a profound moment for me because it was the first time in my life that I really owned all of the things that I felt. And I'm not saying that I wake up every morning with a smile on my face and joy in my heart, but I actually now have more joy. And I think joy is tangible. It's something that is actually, I felt was out of reach. I thought I was always reaching for it, but it was just like there and I just needed to grab it. I needed to take hold of it and say that I'm worthy of having joy. And that's different than happiness. I believe that it's fundamentally different because joy comes without any understanding of what the situation is going to be like or how circumstances are going to change. It's really just about accepting that I am deserving of that. And that's been my way of experiencing it. But as a mindset coach, I think it's important to help people understand what that journey was like for me and what that journey is like for other folks as well. I think oftentimes we feel alone, like we're the only person going through that. And, you know, you listen to people tell their story and you're like, oh, but they're different. You know, that's not kind of me. I've been through this before. Like I've heard this before. Not really. I think that we're unique in that way, but we're also collectively the same in the same token, that our experiences of pain, whatever that pain is, hits us the same way. And therefore we can actually find skill and resilience in ourselves to build that emotional resolve around it.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, when I think of people who inspire me to have that joy and that inner peace, no matter what's going on around me, right? Because I fail at that, right? My 6-year-old son's really good at getting me to just give up my peace, let me tell you. He seems to excel at that. He's part of my journey and my lessons as well. But I think of people like Mother Teresa. This is a woman who literally had a bed, a dresser, and a chair and a Bible. And she was as content and peaceful and joyful. You look at the pictures of her face just lit up with joy. This woman was a nun working in the ghettos of Calcutta.
Yes.
Like, you know, literally one of the worst places for humans to be. And there she was, radiating joy. She affected people just by their being in her presence. Right? Because we are not just senders of emotional energy. We are receivers as well. And when we get around people who inspire us, right, we receive that as well. And so it behooves us to send the good vibes. It behooves us to do that. And we offer people the opportunity for healing when we do that. I think of one of the biggest mentors in my life, right, that I never met, but that's Dr. David R. Hawkins, okay? Psychiatrist, medical doctor. He had one of the biggest psychiatric practices and most successful psychiatric practices in the 1980s in North America, right? He could, by his presence, they would bring him like people who were mute, right? Patients who had just stopped communicating on every level, psychiatric patients. And they would literally just they would bring them in and just sit them in a chair in his room with him. And as a matter of course, what would happen is that person would start talking again. And that is a beautiful thing. And that, because we're senders and we're receivers. And when we do the important inner work, when we heal, we actually offer that opportunity to others.
Yeah.
So if you want to share a little bit more about how you now offer that opportunity to other people after having done some of that real important inner work in yourself.
Well, that story you shared about the psychiatrist, I actually didn't know, but it's a profound story. And I think what I hear and what I've learned along the way is when we show up as our authentic self, we allow people or give them permission to do the same, right? Some of us are hiding. I mean, I've been hiding for years. I'm stubborn. Like I can hide. I can like avoid. I'm just classically able to do that. We call it all these different names, procrastination or whatever. But I do think that when you allow yourself and give yourself permission to be and show up as you, so many people are healed. So many people are better because then they can show up as you. And I'm not talking about like showing up angry, showing up bitter, showing up revenge. You know, that is not showing up as anybody. That's just showing up angry, right? Showing up as you is actually showing up with the feeling behind the anger, the feelings behind the disappointments, the feelings behind that. We all have that need to just be loved and validated. I think, you know, there are certainly, and I'm trying to remember your question, but there are certainly things along the way that can make you forget what it means to be you, right? And I think that it's important for us to write down the things that we value the most. And when we get to the heart of the matter, when we think about the things that you value the most, be intentional about your day and making that the priority, right? You know, my core values seem to change a lot, but one core value doesn't ever change is Kim is going to show up Kim, right? I tried to assimilate. I mean, I wanted to change my voice because I was a little country girl. I wanted to, you know, not use the ebonics if that's what they call it. but there was something Southern about me. There was something that was rich about my heritage that I wanted to hold on to. And so I can't let that go. That's a part of me. That's a part of my identity. I want to make sure I'm answering your question, Adam, and I think I forgot the big part. So please tell me if I didn't hit that.
How are you using that to help other people heal now in your work?
Yeah. So, I'm not a person that want to sell any type of product or packaging, but I really do think it's important for someone like me to help coach some professional women who have experienced burnout or approaching burnout or just never want to have it ever. And so I think that's a fundamental thing in this burnout package that I'm doing, Burnout to Breakthrough. The idea is for women to redefine what success means for them. Success is not our accolades or what car we have or, what degrees we offer folks. Success is bigger than that. It's about finding your purpose and your meaning and what's important to you and cultivating those things so that you wake up every day feeling refreshed and just vital and ready to spread the joy to the community that you love most. We all have communities that we care about in our ecosystem, but I want to make sure to stress that some of us won't be here to support future generations if we don't start taking care of ourselves. And so I'm packaging a program that supports women who are successful in every right. They have the accolades, they have the gifts, they have the talents. They're using them. They know their power, they know their worth, but they feel depleted, right? I want to share those skills that I've learned, that I've cultivated, that gives me power and strength, even in those days where I don't feel like getting up, because those days happen too. So that's what I'm offering the world as a coach. And obviously I'll continue to do my clinical work as a psychiatrist, but that's where I'm at with it.
I love that. And I can totally relate to that because as a psychotherapist myself, right? My coaching focuses on helping other therapists. Why? Because do us therapists really need more therapy? Okay. Imagine how hard it is for a therapist to find someone who's so next level that they can really help them. It's like, no, you're using the techniques I use every day. If I thought that would, if I wanted to use those, I'd be using those, right? No, I need some next level stuff here, right? And then on top of that, it can take a lot of time and a lot of money because, it may take a year or two in therapy to really get that work done with a high level therapist. That's a reasonable time period. And so what I do is I'm dedicated to helping other professionals time collapse that inner work, right? When I work with people with the emotion code, okay, I learned applied kinesiology, also known as muscle testing, through Dr. Hawkins' work. He is the seminal artist in that, right? I have book after book of his here in this office. The book Power versus Force. If people haven't read that book, Power versus Force changed my life. Literally, my brother handed it to me, and then he went out on intercoastal waters with his family, and he came back, and I had devoured like 2/3 of that book that afternoon, and I was like, "What the heck did you hand me, man?" Right? And that it showed to me that one of the greatest gifts that we've been giving as humans is the gift of discernment, which is sorely lacking in the world. How do we know if something is fundamentally life-enhancing or if it is not, right? Well, Dr. Hawkins proved time and time again in a replicatable manner that muscle testing or applied kinesiology is the method to do that. And then I found Dr. Bradley Nelson's work, where he's like, well, when we have these typically negative experiences and we stuff these emotions down into our body and we tell our subconscious, we're just going to stuff this down or we're going to set it aside and deal with it later. We never do. And spoiler alert. And then they just sit there in our body, and the nature of this energy is to keep moving. Right? Nature of energy, it's emotion, it's energy, emotion, it's the nature of it. So when it sits in our subconscious, it sits in our precious body, it just causes mischief. My brother developed bowel cancer from stuff at 38 years old, from stuffing emotions down, stuffing them down in this little knot in his gut, right? And so when I found Dr. Nelson, and he's like, oh, so we just, connect in with the subconscious, and we go down there and we have the subconscious, which never sleeps and never forgets, tell us, right, which emotions are stuffed down there. And then we go through a process of releasing it to heal ourselves and move that energy along. And the method the tool that we use to do that is muscle testing. I was like, you got me. You got me. You're like, I am all in on this, right? And then I was like, okay, well, where can I really best make the biggest difference? In the helpers, in the healers, in the people who are out there helping other people in the health professions, right? Eventually it'll go to, psychiatrists and doctors and practitioners of that sort of physical health, right? Because like you said, they don't talk about that in the schooling.
Right.
Right. And it's like, okay, where can we take this and put it somewhere that it does such a great healing that then becomes amplified out to other people, because the patients, the clients that they see then get that healing, because they're in the presence of someone who's done that important inner work and done that healing, right? And it's so simple. I just want to shout it from the mountaintops, right? And it's the two biggest gifts that we've ever been given as humans, right? Discernment and letting go. And healing happens when those things are wedded together, right? It's that deep inner work. You did it through a somatic practitioner, okay, who walked you through a process like, okay, where do you feel that? Mm-hmm. And then you were able to get into that letting go. Can you share a little bit about that experience with our audience?
Oh, wow. So it was a layered step, because I started with hypnosis, actually a therapist who does rapid transformational therapy. And then from there, I was able to feel comfortable. I mean, I think sometimes in certain communities, you're like, I'm not going to go somewhere when someone's doing hypnosis or telling me where, stuff is in my body. So I was one of those folks, even though I'm a psychiatrist. And so I did the hypnosis. I felt more comfortable with that experience. I actually found a woman of color provider to do that. And then I was comfortable to do the grounded work. And, Taraji P. Henson talks about this a lot. There isn't a lot of Black therapists or Black psychiatrists. I am a unicorn. So if you're looking
like a male social worker,
right? Don't send me an Instagram message saying, "Hey, can you see me?" I have like 100 of those, and I'm only one person, and I don't want to burn out. But what I decided to do is I decided to trust my innate ability to feel safe, to find safe and seek safety, right? When I became comfortable with being safe with myself, then it didn't matter who the practitioner was. It was about me and my growth and my working. So I went to the hypnosis. I got the hypnosis, the rapid transformation therapy. And then I went to the next stage of going to the somatic healer. Those were the steps. Those steps work. That step worked for me. But it was also true that I had some skill set, or I had some background information about, like you said, we can heal therapists because we are people because we know what's out there, and we know what's junk and what's not. Many people say, oh, well, why are you doing this, Dr. Gordon? Because I see a workforce issue. I see a society of people who are traumatized, who are anxious, who are suffering, who are silent warriors, who are wounded warriors, who need to heal, right? And so those were the steps for me. But I did that with a background in my faith as well. So that was a component as well. But I would encourage people to, start with baby steps, like really find out what this grounding work is, what these techniques are. The Emotional Code is an amazing program. And Adam is great. So you should just go to him if you need help. I certainly feel like even with all the growth that I experienced, there are parts that I want to reach. Like you learn something and then you want to get to the next level. So yeah, that's what I did. And I encourage people to really explore what it's like to seek safety in spaces and healing circles with a community that you feel will support you. And for me, I think a lot of women of color and Black women especially are very suspicious about the healthcare system, very suspicious about the people that they see. They may like, I've done that before. I'm not going to do it anymore because there's harm involved. I don't want to be rejected or have another harmful experience. So I would encourage you to dig deep and seek out the support you need.
Yeah, that's so true. When you speak to the distrust or mistrust or the history of trauma within the medical profession, right? We are on the same page there, right? And certain groups have had, I believe, more experiences of that than other groups. But that system's pretty good at universally traumatizing people, right? And they don't, and the allopathic medicine in particular, right, is very great at forcing a rebalancing when something is out of rebalance in the body through the use of pills and creams and injections and things like that. Okay, and I have benefited from that throughout the course of my life. And so I don't really have any problem with that at all, right? And they're great at surgery, etc., right? But they're not giving credence to the energetic body.
Yeah.
And in that, they do potentially have a higher chance of causing harm because they're dealing with something without some of the core realities. Okay, I have an overactive thyroid that I don't talk about this a lot on my podcast, but I have an overactive thyroid that I believe was a result of a vaccine injury. And I can sort of manage it with a little medication, low doses. My numbers haven't been great for about 4 years. I do a lot of energetic work as well, try to keep my stress down, things like that. But early on in the process, right, the endocrinologists were like, "Hey, we can just remove your thyroid. I mean, we can just go ahead. We might as well just have the conversation about removing your thyroid." And I'm like, "No, I'm like, I have muscle tested my thyroid, right? My thyroid's working perfectly fine, right? Like when I muscle test my thyroid, it tests strong. Okay, yeah, it's got some thyroid stimulating antibodies on the surface of it." Yeah, because of that, or possibly prior to that, my pituitary gland isn't communicating with my thyroid. But my thyroid itself is actually fine. It's actually following its instructions and doing exactly what it's supposed to do, right? So let's and they don't talk to me about that anymore. They don't talk to me about taking my thyroid out because they know that I'm not open to that, right? Because I have the gift of discernment, right? And so other people, right? There are times when it's appropriate to take a thyroid out, okay? When someone has thyroid cancer or something like that, yeah. I mean, you're going to want to, you want to take that out. It's cancerous, right? But you'll also want to look at how did you get that cancer? Many thyroid cancers are actually that's actually a chakra point. Yeah, that's our speaking, our expressive chakra point. Okay, and so there may be cancer there, but there's what are you not speaking? What authenticity are you lacking in that area? That's an area that medicine is not so good at.
Yes.
And so I feel it. I feel it when you say that there are communities that are like, you know what, we've had pretty much nothing but harm from that. The Native Americans used to say hospitals are where people go to die. And so I feel that, right? There is a bit of distrust there, and probably a healthy amount, and in some cases unhealthy amounts.
Yes.
And you probably deal with that every day in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, I do. And I think, I always try to remember that there's some adaptive behaviors that have obviously turned maladaptive, because there may have been times where it was quite necessary to avoid healthcare systems. You don't know what's going to happen. Just a quick story. My grandmother, when I started medical school, she never had talked about racism really, but she would talk about lynchings, and she would talk about being in New Orleans as a young person and seeing, people disappear and you don't know where they went. So I remember going into like the embryology. I guess they called this little lab where they had all these little studies, and I saw like body parts. I saw things that shocked me that people had labs they were doing, and it was just medicine. But there was a time where a lot of experimentation was happening, particularly with marginalized groups of people. And so, yeah, it was probably safe to stay away from the hospital. You know what's going to happen. You may leave without a kidney. Who knows? However, there are, ways that the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and the other associations have tried to rectify the harm that's been done and acknowledging that they did something harmful in the first place, right? That's the first step, to acknowledge that something happened in our history that we have to rectify. But the problems in our healthcare system, and I completely agree with you, are universal. I tell people when I was an academic leader, I would say, you guys get a little annoyed with me when I talk about racism, but this is why I talk about racism so much, because I know if we address racism, everybody's going to get better. Everybody's going to benefit from that, because I truly believe, the same way that God believed, that if we work with the most oppressed around us, everybody is better for it. Some of us are losing our purpose because we're not focusing on the underdog, right? I don't see myself as an underdog because I have a higher SES, I got an education or whatever. But a lot of people are suffering because of that lack of connection with other folks' plights, right? So I truly believe our healthcare system has been in crisis, is in crisis. We really have to reevaluate our values as it relates to medicine and psychiatry. Some of the wisdom and knowledge from other cultures have to be embraced in modern medicine. Allopathic medicine, as you stated, or even osteopathic medicine is great, but there's Eastern ways of doing things. The Native and Indigenous folks, their healing practices, the West African and East African and European practices that we don't use, is hurting us, it's harming us. And so it's time for us to stop saying, well, I don't believe in all of that. It obviously works. People are getting better, so let's try to use it. So yeah, I think we are in a good place, because I think information. The one thing that's good about the internet is there's a lot of information. The bad thing about the internet is there's a lot of information that's not correct, but there is information, and so I would encourage people to consult with some experts, find people that you trust, like Adam, like me, like other folks, and get some good information, because the healing is there. Our healthcare system is not focused on healing folks, it's focused on curing folks, which I don't think is possible. I think we have to heal before there's a cure, right? I think we have to start with the healing, right? And healing sometimes come in different ways, in different formats, but certainly healing is possible. I do feel healed. Now, are all my problems gone? No, but I feel restored, and that's healing for me.
I love to hear that. When my brother had bowel cancer at 38, and he's my brother through the Big Sisters mentoring program. He, when they just went in and they'd snip and they sewed it back together, and they're like, "Oh, you're cured," right? And he was like, "Oh no, no! Wow, how did I get bowel cancer at 38 years old?" Right?
Yeah.
And he traced that back to his growing up with an alcoholic mother. It came to a head at 38 when he brought his new bride from his not new. I mean, they had 2 kids at that point, back over to the States from Australia to get so that everybody could create a relationship with the grandma, right? And then came home one day, and his wife was like, I hate your mom. I never want to see her again. We need to go back to Australia right now, right? 2.5 months. Now this adult child of an alcoholic, right? Kind of people pleaser. Now the 2 main women in his life are at odds, right? And so he just stuffed that down into that little knot in his gut, and he got on a plane and flew his family back to Australia. And 2.5 months later was when he was diagnosed with that bowel cancer.
Wow.
And he went to this retreat after the surgery, and the doctor was like, "You're cured." He went to a retreat, and he woke up on the 3rd or 4th day of the retreat into the worst panic attack of his life. And nothing he did, exercise, walk on the beach, nothing got rid of the panic attack and went back to the event. And the head of the event had the wherewithal and the wisdom to say, Steve, this is the greatest opportunity for healing you've ever had. And he sat him down with this other teacher, and they did this eye-to-eye kind of window into the soul meditation. That's when my brother came to realize that darkness that he'd been stuffing in that spot. All that energy, which should have been in motion, was stuck and causing mischief in his body. And the teacher that he was with said, "Okay, Steve, I want you to look at that. I want you to bring that out into light, and I want you to look at that." My brother was like, "You got to be kidding me! I can't look at that, right? Like that. If I even look at that, it's just going to devour me." And this teacher, this wise teacher, was like, "No, Steve, just bring it out. Fill it with love. Bring it out into the light, and it'll transform." So my brother said, "Okay, right," and he did that. He created this loving space for this. And he saw that wounded child. And then that transformed into the reality that he'd given himself cancer from this. And then that transformed into all the life lessons that were present there. And it was an amazing, miraculous transformation. And then the guy across from him said, "Hey, Steve, I think it's time to let that go." And he's like, What? I mean, I can just let it go? He's like, "Yeah, you totally can. You just let it go." My brother took a breath in, and he released that. And he's in his 60s now, and he'll tell you, "I'll never give myself cancer again."
I love that story. Oh, wow.
And that really was a pivot point in his life. It was a pivot point in my life. And then a few years later, he introduced me to Dr. Hawkins, muscle testing. And then when I found the emotion code, and it was both of those wedded together, I messaged him. I tell him, like, "Bro, we need to get on like a video, right?" And I was like, "You are not going to believe what I just found." And of course, he's like, "Oh, looks like there's a training." And like 2 days later, he's like, "Yeah, I signed up for that training." And I'm like, "Well, then I've got to," right? And so we went through the training together, different sides of the world, doing emotion code sessions as far away as you can be in the world. It was amazing. That's when it's energy that you're dealing with, right? And now that's what my brother does in his retirement. And it's what I do full time. And I just want to amplify this, right? And we are meaning-making machines. That is what we are as human beings. And when we find things like that, and all the things are laid out in front of us, we can choose to ignore that, or we can choose to make meaning. That's our free will.
Yeah.
It's all going to be laid out in front of you all the time. And your subconscious is going to be like, "Hey, deal with this," right? And then one day we're ready to deal with that, and we see it, and then we let it go, and the change happens, and the inner work happens, and the rebalancing happens, and now we can pay that forward to other people.
Yeah, that was a mouthful. I'm thinking in my head right now, and I'm trying to get out of it. But one of the things that's become clear to me over and over and over again, particularly when you're working with medically complex patients who have these multiple health care issues, is the emotions. Dr. Anita Phillips, she's a psychologist, but she's also in the ministry. She teaches people about dealing with their emotions, and she wrote this great book called The Garden Within. I truly believe that book is phenomenal in the sense that we have to understand that a lot of the things that we're calling health problems are emotional problems. It's not to say that you don't have a health problem, but I do believe that we are created to, like you said, to have meaning, to build meaning. And our emotions are our connection to the spirit world, right? It is because God had emotions, he gave us the same gift. Emotions are a gift. It's not a bad thing to have emotions. It's not something that we need to get rid of and figure it out. It's actually a gift. It is our guide. Our emotions guide us to the results that we want in our life. And when we're not walking in our gifts or in our with our emotions, and if they're not aligned, we're gonna have some problems. It may show up emotionally, it may show up physically, but it's from the same seed, right? We have all these seeds that we cultivate, but we also plant good seeds, right? Thank God we have those good seeds. Like you have your brother who was able to recognize, hey, I have this childhood experience that really is shaping how I respond to this relationship barrier between my mom and, my wife. And I gave myself cancer. I really believe that my mom, with all her wisdom and her, her greatness, she gave herself cancer, right? And I know that through her storytelling, she wanted me to have a healthy life, a whole life, a fulfilling life. She wanted her generation and her kids to have that. So some of us have this opportunity to really share that gift with others, right? By letting go of all the societal expectations, letting go of all the traumas, letting go of the microaggressions, racism, whatever, letting go of the lost jobs. I mean, some people have lost jobs and income, and they're wondering what their future is going to be like. Letting go of those things and recognize that as long as I have breath in my body, that spirit inside of me, those emotions that's going to guide me, that I have purpose. And my purpose is not defined by anything other than the purpose and the completeness that was bestowed upon me from day one. No one can take that away from me. That is like a profound gift. And I really appreciate you sharing the story of your brother, because that's just like an amazing story. Not many people can say that they actually had cancer and lived to tell the story. That actually is probably the most profound part. You use the word transformation. Our suffering, if we can get to the other side, it is transformational.
Yes.
I mean, the downloading of the messages that I received from God during my suffering was just amazing. But we have a story to tell. So let's tell the right stories to ourselves so we can heal.
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. Dr. Gordon, I'm going to hand this over to you here. We're coming kind of to the end of the podcast here. And is there anything that you really wanted our audience to understand? Is there anything that you really just want to make sure that you drive home, that people can have a takeaway that make sure that they got that today from you?
Yeah. I don't know if I shared, but I want to share this because I think it's touching my heart to say. I was a person who had achieved a lot of success, but I also felt that was the end. Like I wasn't going to actually have more. Like maybe I had gotten enough gifts and that was time. And that was a little bit scary for me and disappointing. I want to encourage people who are feeling like, well, maybe this is it for me. Maybe I don't have any other way to stretch myself. Maybe I made so many mistakes already that it's too late. I want to encourage you to renew your mind and spirit. It is never too late. This is actually just the beginning of your journey. And I think that's really important. When you share your brother's story of having cancer, I mean, he's here and he's still motivating you and supporting you. And so a lot of people have had things happen and they feel like that's the end, that no one cares. And they're not even sure if they care anymore. Don't give up. Sometimes our greatest success is right around the corner, but we just kind of let go just a little too soon. I'm glad I didn't give up on myself. I'm glad I allowed myself to heal and rest and understand what burnout meant to me. And I just hope that I can bestow the gift that was given to me to others.
And the world is now a better place now that you have done that healing, Dr. Gordon.
It is. I hope so. Yes.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Gordon for being here today and sharing from the heart her authenticity and her passion and purpose have shined through. And I really hope that that our audience caught a glimmer of that today. And I feel like there's even more to share. And who knows, may have you back on, Dr. Gordon.
I would love it. This has been amazing. Thank you. The conversation was amazing. Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to our show today. Of course, you can learn more about our guests by following the links in the description. It sounds like we're going to have a couple of book links down there too. And as always, I want to remind you to search your heart, do the important inner work, and give yourself permission to find your purpose and live your life's work. Thank you again for listening today, and thank you, Dr. Gordon.
Thank you.